Welcome to Dark Vows, the Trial of Thomas Randolph. Dive into the live courtroom drama as we bring you unfiltered audio from one of the most riveting trials of the year. Accused of multiple marital murders, Randolph's fate unfolds before us. Join us as we navigate the testimonies, the tension, and the truth behind the headlines. This is Dark Vows.
All right, let's go on the record and see 250966, State Nevada versus Thomas Randolph. May the record reflect Mr. Randolph is present with Mr. Tomczyk and Mr. Orm. Ms. Wakerly and Mr. Hammond are here on behalf of the state. All right, so this is on for several motions. It's my understanding Detective Mogg needs to testify.
Your Honor, respectfully, the state is asking for him to go first. He has some paperwork associated with his retirement that he needs to do.
And which motion is he? This is the motion limited to suppress the video walkthrough?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so let's start with that one.
Okay.
Let's start with defendant's motion to limit to suppress the video walkthrough.
We have no objection to him going first, but just real quick, I'd let the state know I was going to do this. Mr. Randolph has an issue regarding his medical condition as it relates to the trial.
Okay.
He had a specific request of the court that he be allowed to be taken back to his unit when we have extended breaks like over the lunch hour.
Okay.
That will help him regulate his medicine and eat and make sure that he can stay awake during trial. That's a concern for both he and his counsel.
Okay.
He also has a number of health issues that Your Honor is aware of.
I'm aware.
So assuming that we can accommodate that, I think it would make the trial process much smoother for everyone.
All right, I will, obviously I'm not going to put that on you. I know that's not the decision that you make. I will call over to the jail on our lunch break and have a discussion with them regarding that.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay. So I can't make any promises that happens today. Would you be able to get through today?
Yeah, I'd probably get through all of it, but it's just the sitting and compressing of the discs, and it's just going to make things a lot worse. And then I can get my medicine at a set time. It just makes me nod off the medicine, but it's just a matter of getting it at a different time so that I'm nodding off, not in court. We keep talking about it, but they send somebody and they'll say it has to be Dr. Mapleton, but I never see him.
Okay.
So
I'm just saying today, when we break for lunch today, I'm going to call the jail and address this issue with them. So this officer's not going to have any notification today of what them and I talked about over lunch, but we should be able to have that addressed by tomorrow.
okay.
Okay. All right. All right, so let's go with this. Defendant's motion to limit to suppress the video walkthrough. May the record reflect that the court has read the motion as well as the court has read the state's opposition. We are prepared for the evidentiary hearing.
And just for the record, Your Honor, did you review the video of the?
I did. I have had an opportunity. Mr. Tomczyk provided me the video, and there were approximately 15-minute sections.
Correct.
Was that the totality?
Yes.
Okay, because that's what I saw.
Okay. And so I'll just get some technical.
All right.
Just it's missing.
I'll talk to you about it after.
You just solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. Please be seated. Will you please state and spell your first and last name for the record?
Clifford, C-L-I-F-F-O-R-D, Mogg, M-O-G-G.
Thank you. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Sir, how are you employed?
I'm a detective with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, Homicide Section. I've been a police officer for over 35 years with Metro for 27 and assigned to the Homicide Section for 20 years.
Okay, got my next three questions. Were you part of the group of detectives that were assigned to investigate the murder of Sharon Randolph as well as Michael Miller?
I was.
Did you respond to the original scene on the 8th of May of 2008?
That's correct.
Actually, kind of going into the 9th of May, did you sit down and interview the defendant, Thomas Randolph?
I did.
Was that with Detective Hardy?
Correct.
You see Mr. Randolph in the courtroom today?
I do. Seated next to defense counsel wearing a headset.
Your Honor, may the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant?
The record was so reflected.
That first interview was conducted at Metro headquarters.
Correct.
Sometime after that, were you participating or were you a participant in a video walkthrough at the Rancho Santa Fe residence?
I was on May 15th.
Okay. Can you kind of walk the court through the logistics of how that was arranged with Mr. Randolph to the extent you have personal knowledge of that?
Just one second. It's May 15th of 2008, correct?
That's correct, ma'am.
Okay.
So on May 14th, I spoke to Mr. Randolph via telephone and asked him if he was still willing to do the walkthrough. He was. We scheduled it for the evening of the 15th at about 8 o'clock at night, I believe is when it started.
Did he arrive, I assume obviously he's out of custody at this point.
Correct.
Did he arrive?
Hold on just one second. Okay, Mr. Randolph? Mr. Randolph, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, Mr. Randolph, the only person I can hear is you. So I know that you're trying to whisper, but just keep in mind, I'm picking up everything you're saying, and it's hard for me to hear Detective Bump.
Okay.
Okay, so I don't know what you and Mr. Orr want to work out, but I can only hear you. Okay?
Mr. Randolph obviously is out of custody on the 14th,
That's correct.
and you contacted him with a phone number that he provided to you.
Yes.
And it sounds like there might have been a discussion prior to the 14th about doing a walkthrough. Is that fair, or was it first broached on the 14th?
There was discussion.
Okay, prior to that.
Yes.
And then you asked him if he could meet the next evening on the 15th?
Correct.
And was the time of 8:30 in the evening important with regard to the case?
I believe we wanted to try and make it the same time as when the incident was reported, or as close as we could get to that. And we also wanted to make it convenient for both us and Mr. Randolph.
Okay. When you got there, what other Metro personnel were present?
My sergeant, Rocky Albee, I believe Detective Rob Wilson was there, Detective Dino Kelly, myself, and then there was the Metro videographer, and I can't recall his name.
Okay. The videographer, is that person associated, or was that person associated with homicide, or was that person just there to film?
No, he's not associated with our section. He is a Metro employee, and that was just what he did for the department, was video recordings.
And when we're talking video back in 2008, right? This wasn't done on a phone or anything like that?
That's correct.
And so it was like a bigger camera?
Large camera.
Okay, and that person's duty was not to ask questions, but just document what took place?
Correct.
When you got there, did you get there before Mr. Randolph, or was he there before you?
No, we got there prior to.
Okay, did you see Mr. Randolph arrive?
He arrived with, I believe it was his brother, and I don't recall his name.
Okay, and did both of those individuals get out of the car?
Yes.
Did you speak to the brother at all, or were you only speaking with Mr. Randolph?
I believe I introduced Mr. Randolph and his brother to all of my partners who were present, kind of explained to them what was going on, and then after that I just dealt with Mr. Randolph.
Okay, and where did the brother go while you were speaking with Mr. Randolph?
I believe he went to the backyard and sat back there with Sergeant Albee.
Okay, and so he isn't interacting with yourself or Mr. Randolph at all during the course of the walkthrough?
No.
When Mr. Randolph arrived, did he ask to move the walkthrough to a different day?
No.
Did he say he wasn't prepared to do the walkthrough?
No.
Did he say he had ingested any medication or any kind of substance which would make it difficult for him to do the walkthrough?
No.
Did he ask for any kind of delay whatsoever in doing the walkthrough?
None.
Once the walkthrough started, was there a point in time when the videotapes had to be changed because they were sort of filled up with data?
Correct.
During the times there's no filming going on, did Mr. Randolph ask to stop the walkthrough at all?
I don't recall him ever asking to stop the walkthrough.
Do you recall him ever asking to delay the walkthrough or take a break during the walkthrough?
Toward the end of the walkthrough, I believe he made some mention of his back hurting, And after that, it was only a couple minutes before it ended.
Okay. After the walkthrough, I assume he leaves with his brother?
Yes,
And then you, the homicide people, all leave as well as the videographer?
correct.
At any time prior to him doing the walkthrough, was it suggested to him that if he did not do the walkthrough, he would be arrested?
Not by me.
Okay.
Nobody that I heard talk to him said that either.
Okay. Anytime during the walkthrough, did you hear anyone tell him you either do the walkthrough or you will be arrested?
No,
You didn't hear anyone else say that either, I assume?
no,
Anytime, to your knowledge, or within any time that you had conversations with Mr. Randolph, was there ever a threat made that if he did not participate in this walkthrough, he would be arrested?
no.
Thank you, sir. I'll pass the witness, Your Honor.
Cross.
Morning, Detective Mogg.
Morning, Mr. Tomczyk.
How are you?
I'm well, and you?
I'm good, thanks. Just want to talk to you about a couple of issues related to the testimony you just gave on direct examination, okay?
Yes,
Okay. You were aware of the investigation as to the homicides that occurred back on May 8th, a week prior to the walkthrough date, right?
that's correct.
Were you present at the scene?
I was.
Did you walk the scene?
I did.
Were you present when photographs were taken?
I may have been present when some were taken.
Do you recall him ever asking to delay the walkthrough or take a break during the walkthrough?
Toward the end of the walkthrough, I believe he made some mention of his back hurting, and after that, it was only a couple minutes before it ended.
Okay. After the walkthrough, I assume he leaves with his brother?
Yes,
And then you, the homicide people, all leave as well as the videographer?
correct.
At any time prior to him doing the walkthrough, was it suggested to him that if he did not do the walkthrough, he would be arrested?
Not by me.
Okay.
Nobody that I heard talk to him said that either.
Okay. Anytime during the walkthrough, did you hear anyone tell him you either do the walkthrough or you will be arrested?
No,
You didn't hear anyone else say that either, I assume?
no,
Anytime, to your knowledge, or within any time that you had conversations with Mr. Randolph, was there ever a threat made that if he did not participate in this walkthrough, he would be arrested?
no.
Thank you, sir. I'll pass the witness, Your Honor.
Cross.
Morning, Detective Mogg.
Morning, Mr. Tomczyk.
How are you?
I'm well, and you?
I'm good, thanks. Just want to talk to you about a couple of issues related to the testimony you just gave on direct examination, okay?
Yes,
Okay. You were aware of the investigation as to the homicides that occurred back on May 8th, a week prior to the walkthrough date, right?
that's correct.
Were you present at the scene?
I was.
Did you walk the scene?
I did.
Were you present when photographs were taken?
I may have been present when some were taken. My main focus, though, was Mr. Randolph and interviewing him while the scene was being investigated.
Okay. And while that was taking place, you left from the scene and went down to Metro headquarters in order to conduct that interview in the very early morning hours of May 9th, right?
That's correct.
And that was a videotaped, recorded interview with yourself and your partner at the time, Mr. Hardy, right?
Correct.
Okay. In the week between that interview and when you ultimately did the walkthrough, yourself and other homicide detectives discussed things that were relevant to the investigation, right?
That's correct.
One of the things that you were aware of very early on is that Mr. Randolph took some prescription pain medication.
Yes,
In fact, there was quite a bit of prescription pain medication prescribed to him that was present at the Rancho Santa Fe address, right?
I believe I saw medication, yes.
Okay. And as you discussed with other detectives in the course of the investigation, that was an issue that came up more than once, right?
Which issue?
That he was on prescription medication.
I don't believe it was ever an issue. We knew that he took medication for pain. I believe it was for his back.
Okay. And you mentioned that during the course of the walkthrough, he actually talked to you about that back pain.
At the end.
During the course of the walkthrough, right?
At the end of the walkthrough, yes.
Okay. Is it your testimony that you were unaware prior to the inception of the walkthrough on the 15th that he had taken pain medication?
I would have no knowledge if he took pain medication or not.
Have you watched the walkthrough?
I have.
Would you agree with me that as you observe him on that walkthrough, you see indicia of some type of impairment?
It depends at what point there is an indication of some type of impairment. When he had to get down on his knees and get back up, he complained that there was a little bit of pain. But other than that, it wasn't like he was complaining consistently of pain.
Okay. And maybe my question wasn't clear. You'd agree with me at some point, I think you said it was towards the end, he did make a complaint about pain, yes?
Yes.
You would agree with me that independent of any self-reporting of pain, there was indicia in things that you saw in Mr. Randolph that evening that he was under the influence of something?
Under the influence? No.
Okay. Is it your testimony you didn't see him having, for instance, droopy eyes?
Not any more than the first time that I talked to him.
Okay. Would you agree with me that both of those conversations he had droopy eyes?
I don't know what he normally looks like outside of my contact with him, but he was able to answer questions intelligently. He recalled things. He spoke clearly. I didn't believe that he was in any type of impaired condition.
Okay. Take you back to my question. Did you see droopy eyes or not?
Yes.
Okay. And did you see droopy eyes prior to the walkthrough on the 15th of May?
Yes.
Okay. When the tape first starts rolling in the walkthrough, it appears to me as if there's a little bit of slurring of words. Would you agree with that?
No.
Okay. It's your testimony that as you watched the walkthrough, you didn't see any indicia of impairment in the form of slurred words.
I didn't notice any.
Okay. Did you ask him prior to rolling tape on the walkthrough whether or not he had ingested any mind-altering substances?
I don't recall. I don't believe so.
Okay. So, for instance, like when we're in a courtroom and we're going to ask somebody something important, one of the things the judge asks them is, are you under the influence? Have you taken any medication that may impact your ability to talk in court today? You're aware of that, right?
Correct.
Okay. You didn't ask him any questions like that, did you?
Did not.
Okay. You were aware that he had multiple different versions of opioid-related medications for the treatment of pain, right?
I believe so, yes.
And you know that the ingestion of opioids can affect someone's ability to perceive things, to understand things, and to articulate things, right?
I don't know that I would go that far.
Okay.
Because I know people who use pain medications and they function just fine.
Agree. But there's also people that ingest pain medications that don't function just fine, right?
Correct.
And as a result of that, people are given warnings when they take pain medications that you shouldn't do certain things, right?
That's correct.
Because it can impact your normal human faculties, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you agree with me, you didn't ask him any of those questions prior to the walkthrough?
I didn't ask any of those questions. I didn't notice anything that would cause me to ask that question.
Okay. So in answer to my question, you didn't ask anything?
No, sir.
Okay. Do you recall having communication with Mr. Randolph after your interview on the 9th and prior to the walkthrough on the 15th?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall speaking to him on the telephone the evening of the 15th prior to the walkthrough?
I don't recall the 15th. I know I spoke to him, from what I recall from the report, on the 14th.
Okay. The cellular telephone that you were using as a Metro detective back in 2008, did it end in the digits 5608?
Yes.
If there was a phone call on the evening of 5/15/2008 at 19:18 hours, just for the record in real people time, what time is that?
7:18 p.m.
Okay. Between yourself and Mr. Randolph's cellular telephone lasting 68 seconds, would you dispute that you or someone using your phone spoke to him?
No, not at all.
Okay. As you sit,
On the 14th,
the 15th.
the 15th. At what time?
1918 hours.
7:18. Okay. Is it incoming or outgoing?
It is a call from Detective Mogg to Thomas Randolph's cell phone.
Okay.
You don't dispute that that call was placed?
No, not at all. That would have been me calling to make sure that he was still coming.
Okay. Do you remember anything else about the content of that call?
I do not.
Okay. Do you remember telling Mr. Randolph that it was necessary that he come?
Well, it would be necessary for him to be there if we were going to do a walkthrough.
Do you recall telling him that if he didn't come, there would be consequences?
No.
Do you recall threatening him with arrest as a material witness if he didn't attend?
No.
Okay. Why then did you call him at 20:03 hours on that same night?
Probably the same reason, see if he was going to be there.
Okay. Do you remember what time you arrived at the Rancho Santa Fe address?
I don't.
Okay. Do you remember what time the walkthrough started?
Somewhere around 8,
Okay. Roughly 8 o'clock?
approximately.
Okay. You would agree with me that if you called him at 20:03 hours to see where he was at, he probably wasn't there yet.
That's
right?
correct.
Okay. The time that the walkthrough begins, is that documented on the walkthrough itself?
It should be on the videos when they start recording.
Okay. You mentioned on direct examination that there were a number of different... Well, let me back up for 1 second. You don't dispute that you called from that same cellular telephone ending in 5608 to Mr. Randolph's cellular telephone ending in 4285 at 20:03 hours?
No.
Right? And that you talked to him for approximately a minute?
I don't dispute that.
Okay. Do you dispute that you made threats to him on that call?
Yes.
Okay. Is it your testimony that at no time you yourself told him he would be arrested as a material witness if he did not attend?
That's correct.
Okay. You just don't remember the content of that call?
I don't. I'm sure that it would have been something along the lines of, are you still on your way? How far out are you?
Okay. Do you recall when you spoke to him on either of those telephone calls or at any other time prior to the 15th of May about him staying at a different residence? Do you recall any conversation about that?
I know I had conversation with him about staying somewhere else. I thought it might have been a family member's residence, possibly, just because he didn't want to be at the house.
Did you ever discuss with him whether or not he was staying at a hotel at any time during that week time period between the homicide and the 15th?
I could have, but I don't recall.
Do you recall ever getting a telephone call from him staying at a hotel on that cellular telephone ending in 5608?
I know I received several calls from Mr. Randolph. I don't recall the dates that I received every one of them.
Okay. Do you recall how long the walkthrough lasted?
I would estimate in the area of an hour, less, somewhere around there.
So in the information that was given to counsel in this case, there are 4 separate videos which are each just a little over 15 minutes. Does that sound right?
That sounds correct.
Okay. Is it your testimony that the only thing that happened between the break in those videos was the changing of tape?
I don't recall anything happening between the break in the videos.
Do you know how long the break in the videos was?
I do not.
Okay. Could it have been more than a couple minutes?
It could have been.
Do you have any idea whatsoever?
No.
Okay. During the breaks in the video, did you have any conversations with Mr. Randolph?
I don't believe so. I think I did the first part, and then I think Detective O'Kelly took over.
During the breaks in the video, can you say whether or not Detective O'Kelly had any communication with Mr. Randolph?
Well, I'm sure we did.
You just can't tell us what it was about.
I don't recall what that conversation would have been.
Okay. After the video walkthrough ended, what happened?
We left. Mr. Randolph left. That was it.
Okay. Do you recall, after you left the Rancho Santa Fe address, receiving a call from Mr. Randolph to your cellular telephone ending in 5608 at 22:39 hours?
Apparently I did.
Do you recall that?
I don't recall it.
Okay. That call lasted about 4 minutes. Do you have any recollection of what you talked about?
None.
Okay. Do you remember discussing with Mr. Randolph the fact that he had in his possession bloody clothes related to the homicide?
I don't recall.
Would there be a reason you wouldn't want to take possession of clothes he was offering you that had apparent evidence on them?
So I didn't conduct the crime scene investigation. If he had bloody clothes that I was aware of that night, I would have told Detective O'Kelly and the crime scene investigators there. It would have been up to them to decide whether or not they felt that it was evidence that needed to be collected.
Okay. So in other words, you don't have any meaningful testimony to give because you're just the wrong witness.
I'm what?
Just the wrong witness for that question.
That's correct.
Okay. Do you have any ability to tell the court what you and Mr. Randolph talked about for that 4-minute phone call?
No.
After the interview ended, you mentioned Mr. Randolph left, and you all left, being yourself, Detective Wilson, Detective O'Kelly, Sergeant Albee, and the videographer, right?
Yes.
After the tape stopped rolling and before you all departed, did you observe Detective O'Kelly having a conversation with Mr. Randolph?
I'm sure I did, but I don't recall what that conversation would have been.
Do you recall any communication, either by yourself or by other detectives in your presence, to Mr. Randolph at the conclusion of the interview wherein there were representations made to Mr. Randolph that there were problems with his story?
I believe Detective O'Kelly may have said something to that effect.
Do you recall any threats made by Detective O'Kelly to Mr. Randolph during that conversation?
No.
Court's open.
Pass it, Judge.
Thank you. Detective Mogg, the calls that were referenced by counsel that took place, like one was at 8 and I think one was like 20 minutes till 8. I think you explained that those were sort of confirming with Mr. Randolph that he's on his way.
That's the only thing I could imagine that I would have spoke to Mr. Randolph about.
Okay. Anything unusual about that since you're meeting, you're meeting at a particular location, you're not in the homicide offices?
Not at all, because we would have arrived before him, so I wanted to make sure that he was still en route.
Okay. And as a police officer, you've had training in recognizing when someone is under the influence?
That's correct.
And your training would include noting particular physiological signs, if they're slurring words, how they appear, if they don't appear oriented, that type of thing?
Yes.
In your discussions with Mr. Randolph on the 15th, did he appear oriented?
Yes.
Did he appear lucid?
Yes.
Was he tracking the conversation?
Yes.
Did he give any answers that seemed illogical or sort of out of place given the discussion that was going on?
No.
Was there any sense that you had that he was having trouble tracking your questions or following what you were saying?
No.
Now, there was discussion about the phrase, "you'll be arrested as a material witness" on cross. Does that have any meaning to you as a homicide detective?
At that point in the investigation, he was the victim of the burglary. His wife was a victim of the murder. And the other person who was shot at that point, this was a case at that point of a possible self-defense. So he was not a material witness. He was a witness.
Right. And do you recall ever using that terminology to suggest if he didn't cooperate, he would be arrested as a, quote, material witness?
No.
The video walkthrough took place on the 15th, correct?
That's correct.
There was another interview of Mr. Randolph on June 3rd, is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
In between those two interviews, was he arrested?
No,
So presumably on that June 3rd interview, he drove down and met with yourself and Detective O'Kelly,
yes,
and that was voluntary.
correct,
He could have stopped, he could have not appeared.
yes,
And actually, for that matter, during the walkthrough, he could have stopped it if he wanted to.
yes,
With regard to the prescription medication mentioned by defense counsel, I think you said at the scene you saw evidence of prescription medication in the home.
yes,
You would have no knowledge of what Mr. Randolph took or didn't take prior to meeting with you for the walkthrough.
no,
You certainly didn't have a detailed accounting from him as to what he took before he met with you.
that's correct.
Thank you, sir.
Any recourse?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, you'd like to be excused? Is that your bond, your excuse? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Are there any other witnesses in regards to this motion?
There are, Your Honor, we have Detective O'Kelly, who's also present at the walkthrough.
Okay, thank you, okay.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you. Please be seated. Will you please state and spell your first and last name for the record?
It's Dean, D-E-A-N, O'Kelly, O''K-E-L-L-E-Y,
Sir, how were you employed back in May of 2008?
with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Homicide Section.
How long in total did you work for Metro?
20 years, 10 months, but then I'm back also as a cold case investigator since 2015.
But back in 08, you were assigned to homicide.
That's correct.
Were you one of the detectives that responded to Rancho Santa Fe to investigate the murder of Sharon Randolph and Michael Miller?
I was.
When you got to that scene on the 8th, what were your responsibilities?
We gathered together with the senior crime scene analysts that were on scene, the other detectives. There were a couple of patrolmen that were there as well that got the initial information, and we briefed what we had at that point.
Okay. During your time at the scene on the 8th, did you see Mr. Randolph at all?
I did not.
And I should back up a little bit. Do you see Mr. Randolph in the courtroom today?
Yes, I do.
Could you point to him and describe what he's wearing today?
He's wearing a dark blue shirt and he has headphones on. He's looking down, writing on a sheet of paper.
Your Honor, may the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant?
Your record is over.
And sir, if I think I talked over you a little bit. If I understand your answer, you did not see Mr. Randolph at the scene?
I did not.
Did you, the entirety of the sort of the 8th through the 9th, did you interact with him at all?
No, I did not.
You're aware, of course, at this point that in the early morning of May 9th, he participated in an interview with homicide detectives.
Yes, that's correct.
And that was Detective Mogg and Detective Hardy.
Yes.
You weren't present at that.
No, I was not.
At some point after that interview, was there discussion amongst detectives to see if Mr. Randolph would do a walkthrough, sort of reenacting what happened from his perspective on the night of the 8th?
Yes, there was.
And was that arranged by yourself or by another detective?
Myself and my partner, Detective Wilson, who was on vacation at the time on the 8th, he was back. And we talked together about the possibility of doing the walkthrough video.
Who was the person that contacted Mr. Randolph to see if he would agree to do a walkthrough?
We approached Detective Mogg to do that because he'd already established a rapport with Mr. Randolph on the night of the 8th and into the morning of the 9th.
Okay. So that's arranged, and yourself and other detectives go to the Rancho Santa Fe address on the 15th?
Yes, we did. It was a week later to the day and right around the same time that the event took place.
Okay. To the best of your recollection, who was there from homicide that night?
Well, my partner, Rob Wilson, was back, so he was there. Rocky Albee, my sergeant, who's since passed away. There was Don Bell from the video crew and Detective Mogg.
Okay. So yourself, Rob Wilson, Detective Mogg, and Rocky Albee, those were the four from homicide?
Correct. And then Don Bell, the videographer.
Okay. The videographer, was he connected to homicide at all?
Not at all.
Okay. Did you guys, to your recollection, arrive ahead of Mr. Randolph?
We did.
And at some point, obviously, you see Mr. Randolph arrive?
That's correct, with his brother, Joe.
Okay. When they arrive, who was the person that went up and greeted them?
Detective Mogg.
At some point, do you recall if you were introduced to Mr. Randolph and or his brother?
Yes, we were. Detective Mogg introduced each of the people that were there. And as I recall, Mr. Randolph introduced his brother Joe to the rest of us.
After that introduction, do you recall where Mr. Randolph's brother went?
He went into the backyard of the residence, accompanied by Sergeant Albee.
Okay. Were you present when Detective Mogg started the recording of the video with Mr. Randolph?
Yes, myself and Detective Mogg and Detective Wilson were present when that occurred.
Okay. Do you recall Mr. Randolph ever requesting that the walkthrough be delayed?
No.
Do you recall him saying, hey, look, I've taken a bunch of medication, I really don't think I can do this?
No.
Do you recall him saying, I just don't want to do this at all? Anything like that?
No.
The video is recorded in 4 segments, and I assume the tape had to be changed because it was older technology back then?
The tape was changed at one point. There was an introduction to our presence there, why we were there. That was with Mr. Randolph. And then we went outside to where the vehicles were so he could demonstrate how the vehicle went into the garage. Okay. Once that portion was done where we had gotten into the garage, then it was stopped and we went into the hallway and it was resumed with the Detective Mogg talking with Mr. Randolph for the remainder of that tape. Okay. And then there was a change out of the tape, and then after that, then I speak with Mr. Randolph for the remainder of the video.
During the change out of the tape, where there's no recording going on, did Mr. Randolph request to stop the walkthrough?
No.
Did he say, I want to delay this?
No.
Did he say, I'm on too much medication, so I can't participate in this?
No.
You said that from that tape change onward is when you're the one interacting with Mr. Randolph.
Yes.
Other than the introduction that we spoke about when he and his brother arrived, was that the first time that you spoke to Mr. Randolph?
Yes.
You didn't speak to him on the phone any time between the 8th or 9th and the 15th?
No, I've never spoken to Mr. Randolph on the phone.
Okay. So when you kind of start on the video walkthrough, that's your kind of more meaningful first discussion with Mr. Randolph?
That's correct. It's like we would normally do in an interview, a standard interview. One detective would take the lead, and then once you get to a certain point, it gets kind of turned over to the other detective.
Okay. And then you kind of speak with him until the end of the walkthrough?
That's correct, all the way until the tape shuts off.
Okay. The tape obviously shuts off at some point?
Yes, it does, right as I'm explaining to Mr. Randolph that we want to gather some more evidence in the house prior to him signing the second consent to search card.
Did he sign that?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And then at some point this kind of gets shut down for the night and yourself and Mr. Randolph and his brother leave?
Yes.
Did you have any conversation with Mr. Randolph and the brother prior to them leaving?
I don't know that Joe was standing there when I spoke to Mr. Randolph, but yes, after right before we left, I told Mr. Randolph that there were issues with what we had found at the scene versus what he had told us, and that oftentimes clarification can be done through a follow-up interview or even a polygraph examination. Mr. Randolph explained to us that he would be going to Utah for a couple of weeks, 2 weeks is what he said, and then he anticipated coming back on June 5th, as I recall, He must have come back a couple of days early because we did do a subsequent interview with him on June 3rd.
Did you tell him he was required to do that second interview on June 3rd? I guess it's really the third interview though at this point.
No.
Did he, on that June 3rd interview, did he call you guys to let you know, hey, I'm back early?
I know there was, yes, there was some phone conversation between him and Detective Mogg to arrange for him to come in. All the contacts were with between Detective Mogg and Mr. Randolph because they had developed a relationship, even to the point in that second interview that Mr. Randolph calls Detective Mogg like his best friend.
Right. So then the June 3rd interview happens, and after that, Mr. Randolph leaves the interview, and he's not arrested for weeks and weeks later.
That's correct. Months.
Months, yeah, probably. So at any point did you, with regard to the walkthrough, so now I'm talking about the time period between like the 8th, 9th, and the 15th, did you ever call Mr. Randolph and say if you don't participate in the walkthrough, you'll be arrested?
No.
Did you ever tell him if you don't participate in the walkthrough, you'll be arrested as a material witness?
No.
With regard to you having that conversation with him at the end of the walkthrough where you say, look, there's some issues, we could maybe do a polygraph or have a subsequent interview, did you tell him, look, if you don't do those two things, you'll be arrested, or you have to do those two things or you'll be arrested?
No, not at all. We were maintaining that level of cooperative, exchange between Mr. Randolph and, again, the spokesperson for homicide was Detective Mogg, and we wanted him to, to continue to participate voluntarily.
Okay, and he leaves the walkthrough and he leaves the June 3rd interview on his own accord because he's not arrested.
That's correct.
Later. Thank you, sir. Your Honor, I'll pass the witness.
Cross.
Good morning, Detective.
Good morning, Counselor.
Your testimony is that you never spoke to Thomas Randolph until the 15th. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And the first time you spoke to him is when he showed up at the Rancho Santa Fe address in order to conduct this video recorded walkthrough?
Yes.
Okay. Prior to him showing up at let me ask you this question. What time did he arrive at Rancho Santa Fe?
I know we got there at 8 o'clock, and it was maybe 15, 20 minutes after we had been there before he arrived. I'm not sure the exact time.
Okay. Were you present with Detective Mogg in the time period leading up to 8 o'clock?
Yes.
Did you arrive at the Rancho Santa Fe address in the same vehicle?
No.
Were you present with Detective Mogg when he spoke to Thomas Randolph on the telephone?
I don't recall if I heard any exchange with him on the phone with Detective Mogg, but I know he's the only one that had contact with him.
Would you agree with me that you have no meaningful information to provide about what Detective Mogg and Thomas Randolph spoke about on the telephone?
I agree with that.
Okay. What you do have meaningful testimony to provide is about after Thomas Randolph arrived.
Correct.
Do you remember when he arrived?
Again, I'd say probably, 15, 20 minutes after we had arrived. I believe that we were able to start on time with when we anticipated the actual event took place. So it would be a week following at the same time so that the ambient light would be the same.
Okay. And if my question wasn't clear, I wasn't asking for a time frame he arrived. I'm asking if you remember the moment in which he arrived.
I remember when he got there, yes, with his brother.
Okay. Was his brother driving?
Yes.
Do you know why his brother was driving?
I have no idea.
His brother doesn't live in Las Vegas, right?
No, I don't believe. I believe he lives in Clearfield, Utah.
Okay. Presumably the person that lives in Las Vegas would be more familiar with the area, right?
Certainly. With his own house, yes.
Okay. And you'd agree with me his brother drove him there?
Yes.
Is it your testimony you don't recall his brother telling yourself and other detectives that Mr. Randolph was impaired?
No, other than the introduction to Joe Randolph, I didn't speak to him at all.
Okay. Do you recall Mr. Randolph telling you that he had taken prescription medication?
No.
You were the detective responsible for the scene investigation immediately following the homicides on the evening of the 8th of May.
That's correct.
And as such, you were familiar with what was contained within the scene.
Yes.
And that included photographs that were taken.
Yes.
And you actually physically saw a large amount of prescription opioid medication prescribed to Mr. Randolph, right?
I did. I saw patches, pain patches, and suppositories in the headboard in Mr. Randolph's master bedroom.
Okay. You were aware that he was prescribed prescription opioid medication, right?
At least those. I mean, his name was on the box.
Okay. And you're aware that one of the side effects of that type of medication is that it can affect verbal and motor skills, right?
Certainly.
Certainly people are warned not to drive a vehicle, for instance, right?
Yes.
And you're aware that sometimes taking an opioid type medication can impact ability to recall, right?
I don't know specifically on memory. I mean, I imagine that could be true, but I wouldn't know.
It can impact your ability to perceive things.
I'd expect that that's true, but again, I don't know. I've never taken any prescription medication.
Certainly you've heard that, right?
Certainly.
And you're aware that it can impact your ability to move, to function.
I'd expect so, yes.
Okay. Prior to the start of the walkthrough interview, did you ask Mr. Randolph if he was under the influence?
No.
Would you agree with me that should be something you're concerned about if you're going to do a walkthrough video where you're asking someone to reenact important events?
Had I observed anything that I thought brought that into question, then I would have asked that question. I didn't see that.
Okay. It's your testimony you didn't see, for instance, Mr. Randolph having droopy eyes.
I did, and not that he's able to testify to it, but I remember looking at Sergeant Albee when Don Bell put the camera up on his shoulder. That was the first time that Mr. Randolph, and only time that Mr. Randolph exhibited that trait of the droopy eyes. Okay. It went away immediately after he was done with that portion of the video.
You would agree with me that he exhibited some slurred speech as well?
He did during that portion, and that was it.
Okay. So if I were to play for you the walkthrough of the video, you don't in any way dispute the fact that visibly there is indicia of droopy eyes and slurred speech?
At that particular moment when the camera was put on Don Bell's shoulder, yes.
Okay. And that's when the walkthrough started, right?
Yes, prior to going outside, yes.
Okay. Do you remember what time the walkthrough actually commenced?
I don't. I mean, it'd be right around 8:30, 8:35 p.m.
Okay. Your goal was to have Mr. Randolph arrive around the same time as you, right?
Correct.
You didn't want to start videotaping until approximately 8:30, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
You would agree with me he arrived a few minutes after 8:03, ballpark?
Yes.
Okay. So there's approximately 25-ish minutes between when he arrives till the tape starts rolling, right?
I'd agree with that.
You'd agree with me that during that time you had a conversation with Mr. Randolph?
I did not.
You had no conversation with Mr. Randolph between the time he arrived until the video started?
None whatsoever. Detective Mogg was the only one that communicated with Mr. Randolph.
Where did that communication take place?
Well, we met him outside, and then we went into the house, so both outside the house and inside the house.
Was there a conversation that took place in the garage?
At some point, yes, because we had Mr. Randolph demonstrate how he had pulled into the garage with the Tucson, Hyundai Tucson.
Backing up, prior to the video rolling, was there a conversation that took place in the garage?
I don't remember if we talked in the garage or I believe we talked out front and in the house.
Okay. And when you say we, you're not including yourself in that we?
Right. I mean, I was there, I was present, but Detective Mogg spoke with Mr. Randolph the entire time.
Okay. Is it your testimony that Mr. Randolph's brother did not indicate that he shouldn't engage in the walkthrough that evening because of his impairment?
I had no conversation with his brother, and I didn't hear him convey that to anyone present.
Was there any conversation or concern amongst yourself, Detective Mogg, and Sergeant Albee about his impairment?
No.
During the walkthrough, and there's already been some testimony about this, what we received is 4 separate, approximately 15-minute clips. Is that your memory of how that walkthrough is preserved?
Correct.
You would agree with me that between each of those four, there's a break in the tape.
No, that it was converted from VHS to digital, and I think that's the format that it ended up taking because of the volume, the specific volume of that digital recording, and that's how it broke up. But Don Bell recorded everything on 2 separate VHS tapes.
Okay. So is it your testimony there's only one break in the actual VHS recording?
That's correct.
Okay. Do those originals still exist?
I don't know. I haven't seen them. We never had a VHS tape in the case file. We had the digital.
Were they immediately converted to digital?
I'd imagine. I mean, again, I never had a VHS tape in our case file.
How long was the break that took place between the changing of the first tape into the recording of the second tape?
As long as it took Mr. Bell to pop out one tape and put in the other, and then Mr. Randolph was in the hallway with me, and I spoke for the remainder of the walkthrough.
Okay. Was it pre-designed that you would take over the walkthrough at the change of tape?
I think it was a convenient point in time for me then to take over because I had observed what Mr. Randolph was talking about with Detective Mogg that entire time, taking notes myself of questions that I wanted to ask Mr. Randolph. And at that point in time that we changed the tape, that was a perfect opportunity for me then to take over and tell the remainder of the tape.
Did you discuss that with Detective Mogg prior to that transition happening?
No.
It just naturally occurred?
Correct.
And you can't tell us how long the tape wasn't running?
Again, it's going to be the amount of time that it took for one tape to come out and the other one to go in. It was a very short period of time.
Okay.
A couple of minutes. A couple of minutes at the most.
Couple meaning 2?
I would say 2.
Could it have been 3?
I mean, I guess it's possible but I'd imagine that Mr. Bell is pretty proficient at changing tapes in his camcorder. He's done it for several years.
Could have been 1 minute?
It's possible. I didn't time it.
Possible it could have been 3?
It's possible that it could have been 3.
Okay. And as you sit here today, you don't have the ability to recall the exact amount of time?
No. I remember him changing the tapes, and then we went right back to it.
You'd agree with me that unless someone's running a stopwatch or recording it, it's almost impossible to remember the exact amount of time, right?
That's correct.
Okay. What time did the video walkthrough end? The actual recorded portion?
You know, the best judge for that would be the signature and the timestamp on the consent to search card, because that's what we were addressing right at the end of the video, but it doesn't have a timestamp on it. I know it's approximately 58 minutes long.
Okay. After the conclusion of the recording, when you did the consent to search card, you didn't immediately leave, right?
No, we did not.
In fact, you continued to have conversation with Mr. Randolph.
No, I was done speaking with Mr. Randolph until we were getting ready to leave. I spoke with him. We were dealing with a crime scene analyst was able to respond out to the scene that we had requested, things that we had observed while we were there that we wanted to
Actually,
document.
more than one crime scene analyst, right?
Correct.
How many?
2.
Okay. Who was it?
We had Randy McPhail was there. He's the only one that I was dealing with. I can't recall who else responded.
Mike Perkins?
Yes, the senior crime scene analyst, the supervisor, yes.
Okay. And they actually impounded physical evidence, right?
Yes, they did.
Physical evidence that was discovered by Sergeant Alvey.
Correct.
Physical evidence that you missed when you walked the scene.
Yes.
Okay. You agree with me that after the tape stopped, there is some point in time when you are having a direct conversation with Mr. Randolph?
Yes, shortly before we concluded everything that we were doing with the crime scene analyst and we were departing.
In that conversation, you had yourself developed a belief that maybe his story wasn't what happened, in your view.
There were inconsistencies with the initial statement that he gave us and in the video walkthrough when compared to the actual evidence. And there were definitely things that we questioned. And to attempt to clarify those things, I let Mr. Randolph know that doing a follow-up interview or a polygraph would be helpful.
Okay. You had at that point in time developed a gut feeling about Mr. Randolph, right?
Again, there were things about the scene that weren't consistent with what he said. So I definitely was looking at Mr. Randolph.
Okay. Not what I asked you. You'd agree with me that you developed a gut feeling about Mr. Randolph at that time.
I'm going to object. I think that's vague. He's answered it in his own way. I'm not sure what Mr. Tomchek means by gut feeling.
Well, Mr. O'Kelly knows because he's previously said it.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and overrule the objection at this point. He can answer the question.
You would agree with me that you have previously said that you developed a feeling in your gut about Mr. Randolph, right?
Yes, but it was based on what I observed in his statements compared to what he said in the walkthrough video and what we had at the scene.
So at the conclusion of the walkthrough video, you'd already reviewed the statement that he made to Detectives Mogg and Hardy on 5-9, right?
Yes.
And then you watched the walkthrough, right?
Correct.
And at that point in time, you had a gut feeling about him, right?
It's accurate to say gut feeling, but it's not based on my gut. It was based on what he had told us versus the scene, both in his original statement, what he did in the walkthrough, and what the evidence that we had at the scene.
And you'd agree with me, you've previously described that as a gut feeling.
Yes.
Okay. That gut feeling was that Mr. Randolph was involved, right?
At that point, yes. I believe that it was very possible that he was involved. Again, we needed to clarify by having him come back and clear up some of those questions.
Okay. So the answer to my question is a yes.
Yes.
Okay. When you communicated with him at the conclusion of the walkthrough, that was with that gut feeling in mind, right?
I don't think that's accurate to say. I mean, we were wrapping things up and we were leaving, and I let Mr. Randolph know that we wanted him to come back in for a subsequent interview and potentially a polygraph to clarify or to clear up some of the issues that we have at the scene. Okay. It was a natural departing the scene and ending conversation with Mr. Randolph.
Okay. I don't want to say anything inaccurate. You would agree with me that you referenced to Mr. Randolph that you had problems with his description of the events.
Yes.
And you told him during that conversation that he would need to speak to you further, right?
I told him that to clarify, it would be a subsequent interview and potentially a polygraph. I didn't tell him that he had to do that to clarify it. I was letting him know that we had issues with the scene. That's what I told him. And that we can clarify by having him come back for an interview and potentially a polygraph examination, to which he responded that he was going to be gone for 2 weeks.
Okay. Do you recall in that conversation telling him that if he didn't continue to communicate with you by doing a polygraph or a subsequent interview, that he would be taken into custody?
No.
You don't recall that?
No, I did not say that.
Okay. Did you ever tell him to turn around and put his hands behind his back?
I did not.
Did you ever use the term material witness?
No.
Court's brief indulgence. At the time you did the walkthrough on the 15th of May, were the crime scene markers, like the directionality arrows and the placards, still present in the crime scene?
No, it was actually after we were done with the walkthrough video. That's part of what Randy McPhail responded to the house to do. It was accomplished after the interview.
Okay. Was Randy McPhail still there when you left?
When we were all wrapping it up, yes. Randy McPhail we were all leaving together. Everything was done. And he may have gotten in his car a minute before we were done, but Randy McPhail was right there up to the end.
Okay. So is it your testimony the tape stops, there's a brief pause, a conversation with Mr. Randolph, and then everyone leaves at the same time?
No. As the tape is ceasing, you can hear that I'm explaining to Mr. Randolph that we have some marks that are on the wall that are clearer now, and that we wanted to then have a crime scene analyst come out and the tape has stopped. So the only conversation that I had with Mr. Randolph at that point was to finish explaining to him that we were looking to mark those items on the wall, and we filled out the consent to search card, and there were we knew at that point in time 2 shell casings from the Makarov 9mm that Mr. Randolph used to shoot Mr. Miller, that those 2 were outstanding. So that was completed on the consent to search card. Mr. Randolph signed the card, and that's the last I had a conversation with him until we were just about to leave.
Okay. How much time transpired between the signing of that card until you left?
I'm not sure. It was probably an hour and a half, I'd say, at least. I don't know.
That was my question. It was an extensive period of time.
Right. Randy McPhail had to respond out there. Mr. Perkins responded out to the house. We didn't have them standing by. That was something we observed during the walkthrough, and it was things that we needed documented. So it's their response time. Then they got their work done. It was pretty meticulous on the part of Mr. McPhail with all of the arrows. And then after that was completed and the 2 shell casings were recovered, then we wrapped it up and we were done. So it was probably, it was a good hour and a half, I'd say.
Okay. A lot of arrows put up.
Oh, quite a few, yes.
And a lot of photographs taken.
Correct.
And a number of pieces of evidence impounded.
Yes.
Including biological samples.
That's correct.
Didn't happen in 5 minutes.
No, certainly not.
Mr. Randolph was there the whole time?
Yes, but I don't recall where he was. If he was with his brother Joe, if they'd gone out to the backyard, or I was with Randy McPhail, and I don't think that Perkins stayed the entire time.
And is it your testimony that in that 90 minutes when Randy McPhail was doing his duties at the scene, that you didn't have communications with Thomas Randolph?
I did not talk with Mr. Randolph, no.
If there was reference in the file of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department that Randy McPhail arrived at 9:16 p.m., you wouldn't dispute that, right? That could be accurate. If we had made the phone call to him prior to completing the video, and that's possible, that because I know it was pretty clear, you could see the material on the walls. It had become much more clear, and so it's possible that we had called for him to come out while we were doing the walkthrough video. So his en route time could be very accurate. And I want to hold it to it because it's an estimate, but saying it's approximately 90 minutes, we're talking 90 minutes from his arrival time. I would say from the completion of the walkthrough video so that he could be about his work. We're in his way at that point in time until we were done with the walkthrough video. All right. If he was there 90 minutes, you'd agree with me that time wouldn't start till he arrived?
Correct.
So if he arrived at 9:16, we're talking 90 minutes past that.
I would say, though, to be more accurate, because I would say he did about 90 minutes worth of work while he was on scene, and he couldn't have started until we were done with the walkthrough video. So he had to have been standing by. If he got there at 9:16, he had to have been standing by waiting for us to be done before he could start.
Okay.
And that'd have to be after Mr. Randolph signed the consent to search.
Nothing further.
Read the rest.
Detective O'Kelly, did you say that after the walkthrough is when Mr. Randolph signed the consent to search card?
Yes, I believe that's when we had it done. I was explaining to him that we needed to gather this other information, and the the consent to search card was completed, and he signed it.
Okay, so he agreed to do that after participating in the walkthrough?
Yes.
And Mr. Tomczyk asked you about how Mr. Randolph arrived and that his brother was driving the car. Do you recall that?
Yes.
What was the first thing you had him do in the walkthrough?
He did the introduction to why we were there. I believe he was asked to say his name, his address, date of birth, whatever. Detective Mogg is the one that's asking him those things. He responds to it, so that's the introduction. And then the first thing that we asked him to physically do was to show how he was able to pull the Hyundai Tucson into the garage with the Pontiac G6 there.
And he was the driver then, presumably, right?
Yes, he was.
So you took him out to the front of the house and had him show how he drove and approached the house with him driving and describing how he dropped Sharon Randolph off and that sort of thing, correct?
Yes, although he perceived that the Pontiac was in a different place, it was closer to the west side of the garage where the Hyundai Tucson goes. So he wasn't able to pull in and actually get out of the vehicle. We backed it out. It was very, very tight for him to do that.
But he was able to drive a car.
Yes,
And he was able to park it.
correct.
And he didn't do anything that suggested to you that it would be dangerous for him to drive the car?
No,
Nothing like swerving around or not trying the pedals or going too fast or anything like that?
not at all.
He was able to drive it and drive it normally?
Correct.
And in the video, it shows him pulling in and being able to park the car in the narrow garage?
Yes,
And so he was able to do that too?
yes, he was.
Okay. Thank you. I'll pass the witness.
Any recross?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Your Honor.
If you have any further witnesses.
Not on this motion.
Okay. If you have any witnesses you wish to call in regards to this motion.
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Based on that, will that be the conclusion of this hearing?
On this?
On this motion?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So do you guys want to argue everything at the end, or you want to argue them one by one?
So, for the sake of the witnesses' time, it would be our request to do all the testimony and then argue. I don't know how defense counsel
That's fine with
feels.
us.
Okay, I'm good either way. I just wanted to leave that up to you guys. Okay. So then let's move on to, so we did that one. So you have
I have-
Rob Wilson. Do you need to check? Can you
He
call
should
me
be
to
on.
Blue Jeans and see if he's there? It appears we might have that working now.
Okay, so yes, he would be next.
Yeah, I don't want to speak too soon because then it won't be working. Yes. And you guys sent him the link that I sent to you last week.
Yes.
So yeah.
Did you send it or Anderson?
There's no one here. And we were having some difficulties, so I don't know if he logged on in the beginning and no one was there, so he logged off, so we wanted to contact him.
Okay.
There's somebody named Hannah, who's that?
I don't know who that is.
That's my partner, Your Honor.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted to make sure, because some people like to use, and I think Detective Wilson might have left the department before we started using Blue Jeans, so I didn't know if he was logged in with someone else's name.
Sure. I mean, I have the cell phone.
Okay.
I can call.
So we're gonna have Mr. Hamner step out and turn,
Hey, can you guys approach while he does that?
and then I can call Dean again on this session.
You're listening to Dark Vows, the Trial of Thomas Randolph. There's more raw courtroom drama ahead as we bring you unfiltered audio from trial. Join us as we navigate the testimonies, the tension, and the truth behind the headlines. Press subscribe now so you don't miss a minute. More Dark Vows, the Trial of Thomas Randolph, next.